now.
Brilliant. Okay. Great. So hello, everybody. Welcome to this webinar from me, Kim Stoddart, on how to be a climate change savvy gardener inside and out. If you wouldn't mind keeping your audio on mute just while I'm doing the presentation, then I'm going to go through the presentation for about 40 minutes. There's an awful lot to cover, and then at the end we can look at opening this up and doing some questions. And also just to say as well, Food Sense Wales have asked whether we could just record this, so the session's actually being recorded as well, so it will be available online for people afterwards. So yeah, as the title suggests, it's all about how to become a climate change savvy gardener, and where we're at now. I'll do the introduction to myself first, and then we can talk about the ins and outs of all of this. And within this as well, there's obviously a lot of challenges, but this is very much focused on the solutions that we can look at to help us prepare for more erratic weather conditions and gardening in the future. So my name's Kim Stoddart. I edit the Organic Way magazine for Garden Organic, and I'm their representative for Wales. We're helping to support growing projects across Wales. Garden Organic has a long history. It's been going for more than 60 years, working with all different organisations and our patrons, Prince Charles. I'm also the author of the Climate Change Garden book. I write in the National Press, been writing for The Guardian since 2013, and I write columns for publications like Grow Your Own magazine. And it's all about a more resilient way of gardening. I also teach courses on all things resilient growing. My approach to gardening, my very resilient approach to gardening, first came about really from the writing I did for The Guardian back in 2013, where I took on the mantle, the challenge of gardening entirely for free. So this was very much about entering the John Seymour territory, he's the grandfather of self-sufficiency, of, you know, can you garden entirely for free? And it took me on this pathway of learning how to make, mend and do. And it's massively empowering. And it also took me on a journey of looking at climate change, extremes of weather, and how to actually mitigate all these things that were happening. So that's my background. And although I don't garden entirely for free now, those experiences of making things from scratch, back to basics, make, mend, doing, really inform the way that I garden today. And my actual gardens themselves are based in Sy'n in Ceredigion. I'm just, well, close, it's technically Plump, but it's closest Sy'n. Beautiful, beautiful part of the countryside. And there's a picture here of my gardens, and they are my climate change gardens. And I have been experimenting since about 2013 with ways of building resilience. What happened with this is that my gardens actually flooded back in 2014. And again, writing about the extremities of weather, writing about different ways to deal with, you know, gardens that are more vulnerable, because my own gardens are 700 foot above sea level, very exposed spot as well. So very, very open to the elements. And I also have a private water supply, which means that when in 2018, there was a period of about 6-7 weeks, if you can remember back then, when we had drought, there was no rain at all. And the water supply actually ran incredibly low, which meant that I had to really test my, you know, the practices that I've been teaching, and they all worked very well. So this is very much about resilience, and it's about working with the natural world. Now, climate change, this is the doom and gloom bit, by the way, so we can get onto the solutions. But climate change is, obviously it's happening. I used to have to talk about this and sort of, I suppose, almost justify the idea that we were dealing with climate change. But what we're looking at is greater extremes of weather. So in the past, when we thought about climate change, and when people talked about it, it almost sounded quite attractive. We had these images of almost balmy Mediterranean-like summer evenings, with this idea that it was actually going to become almost quite a nice environment. But the reality is that we're looking at greater extremes of weather. So it can flip very easily from extreme rain to, you know, to drought, to strong winds. And, you know, we never used to have storm systems that were named. So things are changing. It's the unpredictability. So you can have one thing to the next really quickly. And if you look at this year alone, you know, perfect example of this. Everything's a bit later this year. We've had very late frosts, and then it sort of flicks into warmer weather and it's flicking back again. So it's about building resilience, because many of the current practices that we use for our gardens, these are practices that we're told that as good gardeners we're supposed to employ. They actually leave our plants more vulnerable to the elements, and with that there's more risk of pest and disease. And especially, for example, if you look at the milder, wetter winters, then you get a lot more pests, say things like slugs, are able to overwinter. So there's actually a greater challenge around that if you're gardening in very traditional methods. So it's definitely no longer gardening as usual. Many more doom and gloom challenges around this. You know, we live where I live in Ceredigion, strong farming community, and you know, growers can get caught out by the weather. Plants that are in the ground for longer can suffer stress and damage. It can be too wet to harvest winter crops, and a lot of the varieties that we traditionally grow as well may no longer be fit for purpose in the future. Soil erosion from nutrient leach away over winter, it's a massive issue that as we, you know, traditional practices of digging over the soil actually open up the ground, reduce its soil structure, and can leave the soil sort of very vulnerable to having the nutrients washed away. Time and water to water plants. So if you imagine a period of prolonged heat, then that's great and it's all very enjoyable, but it can mean more obviously toing and froing when it comes to actually watering the plants. So that's doom and gloom. But you know, with homegrown as well, the love of growing some of your own produce is something that so many more people have come to during the pandemic. So, you know, the pandemic is an unmitigated, you know, experience that we've all been through, and it's something that we've all had to keep, you know, distance to keep people safe. But, you know, as human beings, we are social by nature. So to have this disconnect is actually, you know, it's resulted in post-traumatic stress disorder. I wrote a piece in the Lancet about this recently, that effectively, even if we feel okay, we're all going to be feeling quite fight or flight as well, because of everything that's happened, uncertainty about the future. So the more that we can get connection, the better that will make us feel. And gardening offers so much for so many people. It's also a great way of feeling better about the climate change, you know, concerns as well. So, you know, the process of taking a seed and nurturing it into a plant, into something you can bring to your table. So just look at even things like, you know, herbs. There's a chive flower head here, and you know, the beauty of the natural world, the beauty of being able to grow produce, plants. I pick a lot of seed heads for cut flowers to bring inside. Just can take you outside of your head and make you feel incredibly, incredibly good. This is a pulsatilla flower head, and the flowers themselves are beautiful, but then when they produce the seed heads, they're actually arguably equally as stunning. So all these things are very nurturing. They make you feel good. It's about, as far as I'm concerned, it's about building resilience in the gardener as much as it is about building resilience in the actual garden itself, because there are lots of challenges ahead. And the more that you can get connected with the produce that you're growing, get connected with the natural world, get connected with other people in a safe way, the better that will be overall. And gardening is a great leveler to help encourage people to get connected in their communities. So with all of this as well, another thing about growing some of your own produce is it's best, you know, arguably best flavour. I mean, especially with certain produce like strawberries, you know, the strawberries that you're going to pick on a warm, balmy summer's evening and just, you know, eat almost like, you know, they are like sweets, aren't they? Amazing. It's going to be so much better than something that you would buy out of season that's non-organic. You know, there's no comparison. And of course, there's no plastic packaging if you're taking something directly from windowsill, from allotment, from raised bed, directly to your plate as well. You're nurturing your soul as much as you are your actual garden. It makes you feel so good. And the good news try and find some good news amongst everything we've been through. But growing some of your own food, working with the natural world holds a lot of the answers. A lot of the answers for climate change resilience, a lot of the answers for well-being for us moving forward for the future as well, with so many different certainties ahead. And from a gardening perspective, the more we can stop meticulously controlling our gardens as well, you know, trying to constantly fight nature, keep nature in control, the better that will be for resilience. Nature holds so many of the answers. And this is, you know, this is not in an organic gardening system. This is actually working with the natural world in a way that empowers everything for the future and is bountiful and makes us feel good. So why do we garden the way that we currently garden, predominantly garden? What is this about? Because the current, if you like, gold standard methods of gardening really are based on relatively recent Victorian country house practices, where you would have a team of gardeners that had to be kept busy all year round. I mean, the Victorians used to use arsenic in the garden, for goodness sake. So, you know, but a lot of this is about, I say, it's about controlling nature in its place, removing every single weed. You're constantly trying to fight it. You're taking, you know, you're planting something, you're whipping it out the ground, you're replacing it with something else. If you're using fertilizers, then, you know, you're creating a space that constantly needs feeding. If you're using, please don't use pesticides, but if you're using anything like that, then you're effectively, you know, really impacting on the potential biodiversity and the life that, if it's there, if it's present in your garden, will actually help for things like natural pest control. And you're creating work. And there's an image here of a very nice looking couple who are very proud of their garden. They spend 35 hours a week, apparently. They were voted Daily Mail's most immaculate garden owners at some point in the last few years. But massive amount of work, and very vulnerable as a result. It's very much about work generation when you're trying to fight the natural world. Instead, if we look to the past for inspiration, there's actually medieval peasant gardeners of yore, and I just like the opportunity to say of yore, because it sounds really nice. They used to use things like mixed planting, like a cottage garden style of planting. They would allow some weeds to grow because some weeds are edible. Things like fat hen were used wisely. There's a lot of medicinal properties when it comes to weeds and herbs, and also it attracts pollinators, and, you know, it's great for natural pest control. It's much harder for things to get out of balance if there's a variety of different creatures. You know, your garden becomes an eat and be eaten world. So something like slugs become food for something else. Seed saving was massively beneficial. You wouldn't want to save seed from everything, but people used to save seed. There were no garden centres to go and buy stuff from. They would make, mend and do. There was a greater resilience. It was all massively biodiverse. It was alive and kicking. Lots of perennial planting, hugely low maintenance. And in the case of the workers, you know, these gardens had to be productive. They had to put food on the table because people were busy working. But equally, it was a hugely beneficial place in which to be that had many different purposes. The picture here you can see in this presentation is actually, it's a peasant garden at Wilden Downey Museum, but there's a really good example of a peasant workers garden actually at St Fagans in Cardiff, which just brings alive how that works. And this is the way that I garden. I garden like a medieval peasant. And I've been doing this, I've been in Ceredigion, West Wales for 11 years now. And it's really in the last, I suppose, about 11, 12 years that I've been gardening like this. And I just did it because it made sense, because I like experimenting. I was looking at climate change extremes, and I was looking at different ways of doing things. And these sorts of methods are massively low maintenance, and it means that you don't have to put a lot of time or effort into your garden, because the natural world is actually there to help. It's there to help, it's there to provide resilience. And my gardens are alive with so much biodiversity. I don't have to worry about things getting out of control. So flooding, my garden's flooded. And the reason they flooded is, and this sort of brings alive some of the issues with, for example, flooding, obviously. is, really in permaculture terms, if there's a lot of water, the idea is to slow it, sink it, spread it. So with this, it's about, as it sounds, slowing the flow. Water will always find a way. And what you find in a lot of, a lot of cities and towns is that there can be issues with, there's obviously some places are built on floodplains, which makes it challenging from the off. But if you imagine a row of terraced houses, and if everybody in the back, back area, if it's a backyard or garden, put a couple of water butts out, even some kind of container, something just to hold water when there's an excess of rain, it will just slow that water flow down potentially that much, that it can have a massive benefit. Because, if it's concrete in front porches, there's nowhere for the water to go. There's nowhere for the water to sink away. So what happened with my garden is there's a neighbour's field to the back. It's about a 16-acre field, and it was used for grazing. It's on a massive slope, and my neighbours decided to grow some crops on it. So what happened is the whole field was ploughed over, and the grass before, if you imagine, it's my impersonation of grass, would be binding the soil together. So it's binding the soil together, and you take that away, you open the soil up, then its ability to hold and retain water is diminished. So what happened is the garden's flooded. So then I put in loads of measures to actually help deal with the flooding, things like long grass at the back of the garden, lots of shrubs, lots of trees help to soak up the water. Longer grass also. Longer grass, so we've had Plant Life in May. They do their No Mow May, and there's more, I think, understanding now about the benefits of letting at least some areas of grass grow longer, because you're nurturing a whole range of biodiversity, but also from a flooding perspective, you're also helping to soak up some of the water. Gravel pathways work well for me because I need an all-weather garden, as well with the teaching that I do when such things are possible. There's a porous membrane which allows the water to actually sort of basically flow away, and allows access. Also, raised beds actually lift the plant roots above the ground if there is flooding. Lots of perennial plants, because perennial plants, if you imagine, because they're longer lasting, they have a much bigger, deeper, wider root structure, which enables them to soak up and hold and retain a lot more water. Not digging. Charles Dowding's been doing a lot around this. It's been going on for a long time, but Charles Dowding's done a fantastic job of raising awareness on this, and it's brilliant. And the thing is, below ground, in the soil itself is alive. There's a whole ecosystem below the soil if we just allow that to happen. And if we meticulously dig and turn it over, we are destroying the ability for the microbial activity in the soil, variety of creatures therein, to actually work to the benefit of our plants. There are symbiotic relationships between plants, between creatures in the soil, that we're really at the tip of the iceberg of understanding. And if you take something like mycorrhizal fungi, for example, which you've probably seen if you're gardening, it binds itself to plant roots. It's like a white fungus, sponge-looking fungus, and that will actually help plants to find water and feed. So if you're just whipping things out the ground, you're taking this fantastic beneficial thing away, effectively, which is sacrilege. So when I'm harvesting things that aren't roots, I will just cut them off at the ground, and I will keep that in, and it helps provide root structure and sort of soil structure for the ground, and it helps to keep water in. So compost, an organic gardening system, it's all about the soil, hence the name Soil Association. And, make your soil the best it can be, compost-rich soil, and it will provide resilience for your soil, and it will provide resilience for your plants. Plants that are grown in soil that is organically rich are going to be much better positioned to actually fare whatever is thrown at them as well, because they're healthier from the outset. Healthy soil is actually a bit like a healthy immune system almost, healthy gut flora for the individual. It's like that for the veg patch, for the plants that you're growing therein. And also using ground cover as well, ground cover to in the round planting, to help protect the soil from during the summer, the glare of the sun, but during winter from the risk of rain actually washing the nutrients away. So actually the worst thing you can do over winter is actually just to dig and turn over the soil. There's a video here that I've done for Garden Organic with lots of water saving tips. But the upshot with watering, which is obviously more relevant to this time of year, is that in a case of drought, and we have some nice weather now, who knows what's going to happen, but you want to, when you water either early in the morning or later in the evening, because if you water at peak time of day, effectively the watering that you're putting in will just evaporate away. So you're wasting valuable water and you're just surface watering. So when you want to water for longer and deeper, so the water will actually permeate deeper down into the ground, then it can actually stay there for longer. If you combine that with things like mixed planting as well, you haven't got all your water hungry tomato plants together. You've got different plants with allowing distance between plants of the same family. Then if you're using ground cover, things like salad leaves and herbs are very light on the soil, so you can plant them round about other plants. Then you're providing protection from the sun and you can reduce the amount of watering you need to do. During the heat wave of 2018, so my water supply ran almost completely dry. So there's a challenge for me to test my skills. And I found I was only able to water once a week in the polytunnels and outside probably 2 or 3 times during that, I think it was about 6-week period. And everything thrived really well, apart from cucumbers. But I've actually since changed the variety of cucumber that I grow. And I now grow crystal lemon cucumbers because they're much more resilient and drought resilient. So it's working with all of this. And the closer you can get to everything, the better that is. If you've got a seedling, a plant, quite often they can, if they can look dry on the top, they can be wet underneath, or vice versa. The only way to really find is just to put your fingers in the pot and to have a look. With the roots coming out the bottom, just getting connected. Look at your soil. If you don't have any kind of skin condition, if you can do this, getting your hands in the soil is good for you. There's been research done about the benefit to the individual, with the microbial activity in the soil of getting connected with the soil, makes you feel good. And it just gives you a greater sense of where your soil's at, and how your plants are, and you're getting connected, and you're getting a much wider understanding of what you need to do. As I say, with digging, I like pulling out potatoes, so I am disturbing soil, get excited, digging for potatoes like treasure, childlike enthusiasm, but yeah, not digging, less digging, much less digging is highly beneficial. And mixed planting, you can see from a picture here of my training gardens, is massively beneficial. It's fun, it's free-spirited. It's also known as polyculture in permaculture circles. You could think it's a bit like cottage gardening. It's what people used to do. It's more akin to forest gardening, where you just have to allow, sufficient distance between plants of the same kind, so they're not immediately together. So you don't get any risk of pest or disease build-up, which is the reason why in organic gardening system you would use crop rotation. But if you plant in this way, where you allow, say, 5 foot between tomatoes, between brassicas, so your cabbages, your kales and so forth, then you're not having the same, you're not having the issues that you would get otherwise with that. So you can be very free-spirited about it. So, it's a bit of a sometimes strange concept to initially immerse yourself in. But what I say to people on the courses that I run are, maybe start in a small area first, then just, and then just build out. Or if you like planting in straight lines, you could still do that, but just allow sufficient gap between plants of the same kind. Because if you imagine, if you had a raised bed, if you had a bed full of carrots, then if you think that the carrot fly, we'll call it the pesky carrot fly, can actually smell the foliage of the carrot, the fronds of, the sort of carrot foliage from about a mile away. So if you've got a huge bed just of carrots, it's much easier for the carrot fly to find what it's looking for. Whereas if it's mixed in with lots of other things, a bit like companion planting, but on a much bigger, more free-spirited and effective scale, it's much harder for them to find. And the same goes for things like cabbage white butterfly, for slugs. It's not, it's not a quick overnight fix building biodiversity, but mixed planting is an important part of this. And you can then do it in a way that works well for you. I like using bright, colourful flowers, edible flowers like calendula, things like nasturtium, things like feverfew in between my plants, and it provides that ground cover. It encourages biodiversity. It gives me loads of lovely cut flowers to work with, and it just makes me smile as well. It just feels absolutely fantastic. So this is a massively low maintenance way of doing things. There's nothing new. It's what people used to do, but it's hugely resilient. And there's a photograph here of my gardens again. And over winter, I will allow things to rot down naturally that I haven't harvested. I have a lot of perennial plants that stay in the ground over winter. I will even allow weeds to grow over winter for the sake of actually holding soil together, just so it's got some structure and protection. You can even there's so much you can try and experiment with. You can turn certain brassica perennial, semi-perennial. So Gardens World recently did a slot on perennial plants, and perennial plants have apparently soared in terms of cost now. It's become very fashionable, they've got more expensive, but actually with flat leaf kale, with chard and with purple sprouting broccoli especially, you can turn them semi-perennial by just leaving them in the ground into their second year and cutting them back. And then you get, it's like super resilient plants. They're able to just almost, shrug off, cabbage white butterflies, the caterpillars, much more resilient, like having a few plants in one. So you get massively productive harvests, and it's just a hugely beneficial thing to do. Seed saving as well. I mean, there's a whole webinar in itself on seed saving, but effectively with home seed saving, what you're doing is you're creating seed that is much more adapted to your own individual growing conditions. So, seed that you buy, commercially speaking, has been produced obviously generically, some of it in climates that aren't necessarily great for, for your own sort of, your own back garden. But, with this, you can hone out the best plant traits. So say if you have a pea, a variety of pea that has fared well against drought followed by strong winds, that you think that's particularly resilient, save some seed from that pea. Conversely, if it's something, say some tomatoes, and the flavour has been particularly delightful, save some seed from that tomato. So there's a way of actually honing the good plant traits, and obviously it's seed for free as well. I did some videos for the Soil Association back in, I think it was about 2014 for The Guardian, and it's all about the love of seed saving. And I think during the last year, more people than ever have got into obviously gardening, but also saving some of their own seed. But it's a massively beneficial thing to do. And some of the easiest ones to work with are pea. You only need to have one plant to save seed from pea. French beans, massively straightforward. Salad leaves. Leeks are one of those plants where you can, if you leave them into their second year, they will develop the most beautiful ornamental blooms. You can see in the picture there in the presentation, it's this beautiful ball head of lots and lots of flowers. Pollinators love them. So it's a great way of attracting pollinators in, but they just look stunning. But also, once they've dried out, you can just shake the seed and you can grow leeks from them. Don't expect to get award-winning at your local veg show leeks, but you will get a decent sized leek off the back of it, so it's worth doing, and the flowers are beautiful. But things like chili will only get hotter if it crosses with another chili, so that's fine if you like chili. Tomatoes are great, radish, parsley, leave your parsley in second year. Lots of things like this, many flowers, wildflowers. It's such a hugely beneficial thing to do. It's one of the most empowering things you can do as well, and it makes you feel really good. That and compost making which again, you know, you're taking all these waste materials and you're turning it into something that is massively beneficial for the veg patch. Attracting wildlife in, it's not hard to do. You just need to let go a little bit, allow the natural world in. You know, say it's an eat and be eaten world. You know, in permaculture principles circles, if you have an issue with a certain type of pest, it's an indicator that you probably need more, you know, more predators to actually eat said type of pest. Mixed planting helps. You know, all these other things help massively, making your soil, your garden as resilient as possible. You know, having a look and seeing. I mean, I have ant nests in the polytunnels and the outside veg patch, but they never cause an issue as well. So it's, you know, something, you know, don't panic every time you see something like this, because actually if it's in balance, it's not a problem. You will know if it's out of balance. But even creatures like earwigs, massively beneficial predators. The likes, I used to have fear of earwigs, but you know, I'm friends with them now. Wasps, people have a fairly negative perception of wasps quite often, but they're fantastic pollinators. They will eat aphids and black fly as well. They'll hoover up loads of aphids and black fly. And it's only really later in the year, at the end of the summer, kind of early autumn time, that they can cause a bit of a nuisance around barbecues. But that's because effectively they're coming to the end of their lifespan and they're having a final blowout. But if you kind of weigh up the benefits of what the wasp provides, you know, them being annoying around a barbecue, I think sort of balances out. So natural predators provide balance, you know, less work, more fun. You know, the sight of a bee, of a butterfly, of a beetle, it's just, you know, it helps you come out of your head and tune into the natural world around you. It makes you smile, it makes you feel good, and provides you with emotional regulation as well. So it's massively beneficial for the garden, but also for well-being. To attract wildlife, leave wood piles. You can make a bug hotel, which is a fun project, leaving dead wood on trees, even allowing a small area to grow wild. Let the grass grow long, leave stinging nettles to move in. It's great for ladybirds, lacewings, and all sorts of other creatures. Feed the birds. Just, you know, just try and work with plants, you know, sort of natural wildflowers that are moving in. And just, it's very much about letting go and see what happens. Nature will find a way. Nature will move in if it's given half a chance. It's about tuning in to the natural world and letting it in for greater resilience effectively. And just a little bit here about myself, my book, and I do all sorts of things. I work on behalf of Garden Organic in Wales, and I do blogs, I write for national press, I do webinars, obviously, hence today, and I make videos and courses as well. But yeah, I'd love to hear your questions as well to make this interactive. So I'm going to stop sharing now to open this up. So it'd be great to hear if there's anything in particular that you'd like to know, if there's any sort of particular challenges that you faced, and just to hear, and just fire questions at me, or I will happily just keep talking as well, because there is so much to say here. Bron at Food Sense Wales as well is going to have a look at questions coming in. So if you want to put questions in the chat, that's great, and I'll have those questions fed through to me. But otherwise, we can look at other subjects to cover. I'm just going to have a drink of water as well, just while I wait for that. Here we go. So let's have a look here. So what are the best? Here we go. Well, the best veg to grow to encourage biodiversity. Perfect, thank you. So with biodiversity, it's really, there's lots of things you can grow. Variety is the spice of life. Variety is incredibly important. So it's about having enough choice, different habitats for various different creatures. So for example, encouraging wildflowers to grow would be hugely beneficial, allowing the long grass to grow long, I mentioned already. And with a lot of the produce that we grow as well, so if you're looking at a veg patch, there's this tendency to grow things and then to whip them out of the ground once they're finished, with a view to then putting something else in. But if you can leave things to grow on, so a few examples here is if you can leave, for example, chives to flower, leave chives to flower, then they're hugely beneficial to bees, for example. Leaving things in the ground over winter also helps for people to various different creatures to actually have a habitat and a home over winter. So that's useful. Creatures like ground beetles, for example, ground beetles are amazing predators. So if you can leave some ground cover for them, they will stay around to the benefit. They will hunt out and seek so-called pests on your behalf. The classic example as well is amphibians. So your frogs, toads, newts, and with this they like long grass. Again, over winter, they like to hide under and in things. So a compost pile is a hugely beneficial thing, obviously to make your own compost, but also over winter, it's great to have, you've probably got loads of wildlife living in there. But if you can build a pond, even the most basic level, create some kind of water source, even an old sink basin, just burying it in the ground, have it so it's flush to the sort of the surrounding soil or grass, and then put a few stones in there to allow things to get in and out. Maybe have some ground cover, and you'd be surprised how quickly things will move in. You'll find that will happen very quickly. You could even have planting around the outside, and it will also, as well as it helping to attract amphibians, it's useful for birds. Birds need a source of water. You'll find that all sorts of creatures can potentially move in. There's lots of creatures that benefit from having a water source nearby. So it's a hugely useful and very easy thing to do. And then otherwise it's, with biodiversity, to give you an idea of, potentially the idea of having a load of long grass can seem a little bit overwhelming, but if you could just potentially mow pathways. So if you have, say I've got some soft fruit bushes at the back of my gardens, and to get to them, I mow a pathway as well. So I mow a pathway around, and I have lots of wild grass around the edging. And anytime I think, oh, I should probably, cut that back a little bit, I then see a lot of moths, of butterflies, of wildlife. So it's just a reminder for me that actually this is proving to be a very, very valuable habitat for a variety of creatures. So growing a little bit wild where you can. I mean, it's, if it's an allotment, then obviously there are certain criteria that you have to adhere to in order to keep your allotment. But you can weave in wild edges. So whether it's creating some long grass at the edge, allowing plants to go on the flower and set some seed, attracts a lot of creatures. But just letting go a little bit and seeing what you can do within the context of where you are. Even inside on a windowsill, I've had hoverflies in the kitchen on the windowsill with lots of plants that I've been growing. So you'd be amazed how quickly nature will move in if you give it a chance. So I'm just going to have a look at the other questions as well. Let's see. Oh yes, thank you, Kerry. Yeah, in Cardiff, it's St Fagans. St Fagans in Cardiff, they have a really good example of a medieval peasant garden, effectively, or workers' garden. So it's it's a reconstruction. They have actually, if you've never been to St Fagans, they do have fantastic examples there of different types of gardens. So it's well worth a look, and it can be useful seeing that as well. I mean, I didn't realise that I was gardening like a medieval worker until I actually started doing research for my climate change garden book. I was just doing what felt instinctively right to me. And the reason that I felt able to do that was I was building confidence in this idea of trying out new ways of doing things. And I was talking about, again, resilience. And, if you're to do only two things when it comes to building confidence to help with resilience, and using your innate instinct and thinking of how to do things, I would recommend compost making, 100% compost making, because you are turning waste materials into something that is an amazing, soil improver for your soil. And it's all about the soil. So, it's compost making, and it's also seed saving. And with seed saving, even if you save seed from a couple of things, then it makes you feel incredibly good. It's, you know, it's completing the gardening circle in a way that is massively beneficial for you as the gardener. You're getting seed for free, you're getting resilient seed, and you're also, you know, as a result, attracting lots of beneficial creatures in as well. So it's, you know, it's a win-win on all different fronts, basically. Compost making is, say, it's, you know, it's a whole massive subject in itself. So I could just talk about compost all day. And I think actually, because I've got a little bit of time, I should talk about compost. So it's one of those things as well. It's, you know, there's many different ways of going about making compost, but ultimately it's about having roughly equal balance of 50% brown materials with 50% green. So what this actually means is it's your veg peelings from the kitchen. So veg peelings from the kitchen, you know, it's grass cuttings, it's if you're cutting back pruning trees or shrubs, you know, if you've got a few leaves that have slightly decayed, all of this will go really well into the compost heap. Brown materials are things like toilet roll, centres, cardboard, you know, just make sure you obviously remove the, you know, any sellotape or staples. A lot of things like cereal packets, you know, tea packets and so forth, they use vegetable dyes nowadays, so they're fine to compost. So using those, they can go in, you know, break them up if you want to. But then also it's about, you can grow things like comfrey. Comfrey is amazing for so many different reasons. You can make comfrey tea. You can, does smell, just to warn you, but it's a great addition to the veg patch. But what I do is I supercharge my compost pile with loads of fantastic things that just make it the best it can be. And then I use that over the veg patch. So I would add in comfrey. I would add in, if you have chickens, then, you know, chicken bedding, nettles, just without the seed heads. You can add in wood chip. You can add in leaves in the autumn. Alice Fowler, well-known sort of, you know, she's on Gardeners World and writes for The Guardian. She famously composts her knickers. So they have to be cotton, you know, natural materials only, but these are all things that can be added in. And what I do as well, because I don't like digging, I think I've made that quite clear, but you can also have ideally a compost pile that touches the ground. So you can get all these heroes that work in the decomposition process of turning all this waste into to garden's black gold. They can come up from the ground. But then I take compost that's ready and actually layer it as well. So I'm layering it over the compost, and then that speeds the process up with less, you know, onerous kind of, you know, digging and turning required. But that's your most basic cold composting system. But you can also make seed compost really well out of leaf mold. And, you know, so much with gardening, there are very, very exacting instructions, and it can be quite off-putting, some of the things you're supposed to do, but actually a lot of these things are quite onerous. So in the case of making leaf mold, if you, rather than having a very deep pile of leaf mold, of leaves, you know, you can just, if you create thinner layers of leaves, if you have a tree that's in shade, allow leaves to fall there. If you imagine a forest, that's what would happen, a wood, that would happen naturally. It breaks down a lot quicker. It won't take 2 to 3 years. You can do it in a year. And, you know, then you can make your own seed compost from this. There are exacting instructions where you're supposed to mix it with this and mix it with that, but you can plant into 100% leaf mold, because I've tried and it works really well. Soil Association, their Innovative Farmers Programme, did some research a number of years ago into other materials that can be made into seed compost, and they found wood chip worked really well. So wood chip, if you have the space and the inclination, if you leave it for a number of years, I believe it was 4 or 5, you've got some free seed compost. So there's all sorts of things we can do, and the more you can work with local, with natural materials, the more that you can learn to make, mend and do, you know, repair your spade, look after it, sharpen it, oil it. you know, name it. If you feel so inclined, you know, there's more of a connection with these things. You know, we live in a very consumerist society where we're very reliant, we have become very reliant on buying things in. But even to a small extent, if we can learn to work with things, to repair them, to make them, it just makes you feel so incredibly good as well. It provides little freedoms that, you know, because of, especially now with where we've been, there's still continued uncertainty, that if finding these little freedoms where you can will build resilience safely, and it will also massively benefit your growing experience and your growing area, and your growing as well in terms of how you feel yourself as a gardener and your well-being, reducing your watering requirements, you know, growing produce, not having to spend so much time and effort in the process, and just feeling good, feeling connected with your space, feeling connected in a way that is massively beneficial. It's gardening for person, plate and planet effectively. And as far as I'm concerned, it's a way of gardening for the future. So I have just talked. As you can see, I'm massively, you know, obviously keen, enthusiastic about things like this. I'm just looking to see if there's any other questions as well, because we've got a couple more minutes. Yeah, Kerry said, thank you, Kerry. Covered a veg bed with a layer of leaves and planted through it. Yes, brilliant. And yeah, 100%. It's, you know, that's it. You're working with a natural resource. And, you know, if you think with what happens naturally is that you do get variety. So if you have, you know, mono planting, so, you know, if you imagine a veg bed, if you imagine actually a whole allotment plot, you know, and this idea of planting one crop here, one crop there, one crop here, what it's a good point that allotment holders have made to me when they've come on courses is that, you know, invariably one thing won't do quite as well each year, depending on the weather. But actually, if you have mixed planting, people aren't going to see as well. So you can get away with it because, you know, other things will flourish. Whereas if you have something, just one crop altogether, it, you know, it stands out a lot more. But there's so much more resilience therein, and it's fun as well. It's fun, it's resilient, and it's hugely productive. I don't know if anyone else has a final question at all. We've got another couple of minutes. Oh, great. Thank you, Joe. I'm just having a look at your message here. Yeah, covered veg patch with mulch, and it's been very successful. Absolutely. And actually with, I was talking before about things to do when there's a drought. And if there's, you know, if you have a long period of sunny weather, then one of the other things you can do is to apply mulch. So especially in the case of very water hungry plants, so things like your Mediterranean crops, your tomatoes, your peppers, your cucumbers, or if you're going away, then it's actually, the thing to do is to water. So water deeply, water for longer, and then you can apply a mulch around said plants, and that also helps to keep the water in the ground. The other thing you can do, as well as another idea with tomatoes, is you can actually trail the stem, say one of the stems, along the ground. And if you trail it along the ground, so it's actually in the soil, and you could put maybe some kind of stone over the top, it encourages it to root. This is hugely beneficial because in the case of a tomato plant, it means that the plant is getting nutrients and water from a few different places. So it gives it extra resilience. And when I've done that before, which is one of the things I mentioned in 2018, I've done it since, you get so many tomatoes because if you imagine the plant is getting, you know, it's getting food and nutrients from a couple of different areas, so it enables it to grow much quicker. So lots of things you can do. The more that you keep trying as well, the more that you find. So you find that the more that you experiment, the more you can actually come up with ideas that work for you as a gardener. And the more you can own it yourself, the better that will be overall. I think that it's, you know, everyone's growing conditions different. You know, I'm 700 foot above sea level. You know, whether it's a allotment in the city, if it's a windowsill growing, you know, it's about knowing, you know, getting in tune with that and thinking, you know, using this innate experience and ability, building confidence, that actually have, you know, a lot of ways of different ways of working. I mean, even if you're growing, for example, you know, talking again about small space growing, if you're growing in a container, a lot of these same practices actually work extremely well. So I have, because the courses, I'm talking, the writing I do, I have, you know, my training gardens, I have polytunnels, so growing undercover. I have a outside, you know, raised beds, which is allotment growing. But I also experiment with, I have a gravel garden, which is hugely low maintenance and great for small space. I also have container gardens, and so I grow in containers. I try out different systems to see what works best. And I grow a lot on the windowsill. And mixed planting works incredibly well in all of these different systems. So again, the same principles apply no matter the size of the space that you're working with. It's about encouraging biodiversity and reducing the amount of time and effort required, even on a small scale. That works incredibly well. But there's, you know, seed saving can be done. Again, you know, if you're looking at something, if you've got like a, you know, say for example, a windowsill box, you can still reliably save seed. You can grow it all year round as well on a windowsill. So a lot of these techniques are very much about working with nature where you can, but it's also about using methods that are more low maintenance. So with containers, for example, just honing in on that in particular, you know, there's obviously less earth to work with. So the idea of mulching works incredibly well, and the right kind of watering. Another thing I've experimented with regards to containers is actually using, if you can get hold of it, sheep wool. You know, if you even if you don't live near to any farms, then if you're privy to or be able to have contact with a farm, especially at this time of year, the wool is something that is quite easy to get hold of. Farmers will probably give you some wool, and it has the most amazing water retention properties. And I've experimented using this in containers, so vertical growing. I did this. I've tried various different plants. I've even grown a courgette. And it did really well, no watering whatsoever. That's really pushing it, growing courgette in a, you know, small container. But the likes of Delfoot compost, which is a really good peat-free compost, their compost is made up of sheep wool and bracken. So that's why I tried this. I now add sheep wool to the compost heap as well. So just keep trying, keep experimenting, but you know, building confidence in yourself is a huge part of this. Ultimately. So I think we're on time now, and I know there's a presentation coming up soon after. So I just want to say thank you to everybody, and happy climate change gardening. If anyone has any questions afterwards, do feel free to contact me. It's www.greenrocketcourses.com and there's a contact form on there, so do feel free. And yeah, good luck with it all. Thank you. Bye.